these global organizations, from the World Health Organizations to the UN to the Democrats in the House trying to slide it into the panic bill of bailout. And you know, it's about digital currency being plugged in and all the filthy lucre, you know, the coins and the currency going away. We predicted this long ago. This is the excuse. And then every single data point, everything you consume, everything you spend your money on, because that's how you translate your life energy in the world. You get paid in currency, right? Which is the paper, or now, maybe, the digital event that connects you to the four things that constitute real wealth. We are being looted on every front under a delusion of vast, massive proportions. It's not conspiracy theory. It's called history, for goodness sake. History. Playing out in the 21st century. They don't even teach history in school. You know, kids who are coming out of high school today, coming out of college, they don't know what the Cold War was. And what it all meant and how it happened. They don't know any of our history. And when you go back to this part of history, who knows it? Who studies it? Who teaches it? Right? They don't. For good reason, they don't. From their perspective, very bad reasons. Because the Democratic Republic that began a little over 200 years ago has been sliced away, you see, one slice at a time. Because what's the target? What was the target in colonialization? Natural resources, right? On the backs of whatever labor you can enslave when you arrive. And that was it. Let's get back into history after the breaks. This is Dr. Nick Beggett. You're listening to InfoWars. And we are changing the way we see the world because the world needs to change. This is the new world. It was about natural resources, right? The real wealth. Because in Europe, everyone lived in these feudal systems where they really didn't own anything. They were just serfs on the land. They get a little bit of what they produced, a place to build a house, and that's basically it. They didn't even own. They couldn't even hunt there. You know, somebody owned the game. And so when the New World happened, which was kind of this whole thing, that's too long to tell this story, but basically think about it as a grab for resources, right? But people came here. And then they had the opportunity, and they said, hey, you know what? We don't want this. The strings that are attached and the kings and queens of Europe can keep it, you know? And so we had revolutions. And we broke away from this and did a different program here. And we learned a lot in 200 years of the way we ran our deal, but it was always about natural resources. Think about it. We had homesteading. You could go out and claim 160 acres. That's a really decent tract of land, you know, as tracts of land go in anybody's book. That's like a quarter mile by a quarter mile, you know, it's a big chunk. And so when you think about that, land, and then you could, if you improve the land for 7 years, 5 out of the 7 years, you got to keep it. And it was yours. And that's how it worked. And it worked that way in Alaska up until the early 1970s. I remember they were still letting homesteading happen here. And it was down to like 5-acre home sites and 5-acre trade sites for businesses. And you could do that on BLM land. It was kind of cool. And you could go out and stake BLM land that wasn't appropriated, and you had to improve it, and then you could survey it, and then you could apply for the patent and get the title. And so you could move public lands into private hands. It was always part of our heritage until the 1970s. We stopped it. And the thought was that there wouldn't be much public land. You know, constitutionally, it was supposed to be post office, military installations, you know. You know, that was kind of it. And then they created parks and preserves, and that took a big chunk. And then, you know, they continue to try and reach more and whittle away at the rights that ran with the land, the energy rights, the oil and gas, the minerals, the wealth. The wealth of the nation is held in the land, natural resources, the labor of its people, The creativity in which we apply our label to make money, called entrepreneurship, which is one of the third factor of economic production. I often talk about it. And then capital equipment, which is things that make other things. You know, like a shovel makes a ditch, like a factory makes a widget. These are capital equipment. It's not money. Remember this. Money is fluid between all those things that are real wealth. And the battle in the nation is the wealth of nations. What is the wealth? What's your wealth when it's all stripped away? Is it some piece of paper, a stock certificate you can wave around and when things get bad, you can't even, you can start a fire. You want to stock up on toilet paper for that. But stock certificates get really worthless, and in that kind of a scenario. But does a farm or a tractor or a tank of fuel? No, because that's capital equipment. That all goes together and makes something, and the land is the land, and your labor is your labor, and your creativity put all together is your entrepreneurship. See, most people, 95, 96%, 100 years ago, had all that as part of their wealth package, not a 401k, not a bunch of paper, but real stuff. Okay, so this is an important thing to think about. They didn't have a lot of gold, because that was, again, the medium of exchange in those days. Just a different medium of exchange between real wealth, things that sustain us and build and are creative, all that. So we need to remember that. But in the context of what we're talking about in slavery, we were all slaves, and then we made ourselves slaves by the income tax that started as a 1% tax on the first money you made that was over $25,000. In 1913, my grandfather was making $7. $7 a week. The thought of making $25,000 a year was the furthest thing from most people's mind ever. Now, my grandfather was an underground miner in those days. They didn't make very much money. Maybe it was up a little bit by then because we were heading into World War I shortly thereafter. But the point I'm making is nobody was affected by it unless you made a huge amount of money. You made over $500,000, which is an absurd amount of money. If you like making $60 million today, they tax you 3% tax. So it was like minimum money. But look where it is now. In the Atlantis, you're talking 70%. You make over a couple $100,000. This is like serious change. Now, is it slavery? You tell me. If you're making a couple $100,000 or you're making $50,000, and if they're taking from you 20% of your labor, of your life energy, thing that's really valuable, as I've said here before, are they just grabbing that chunk of your 80 years that you might get here and deciding it's appropriate to steal that from you? Because that's really what we're talking about, is how much of that should these guys take from us, our life energy and the transformation of money, the medium between our labor and creativity, our life energy. They steal this in an income tax. and we don't even consider it in this way anymore as part of our normal thinking, because we gave that normal thinking up 2 generations ago. So my grandfather was always so uptight about so many things. I think about it, well, what did he get to see? He was getting a horse moving in 1890 when he was born and being transported from wherever, he was going. And I saw where he was born. And, my cousins still live there in Croatia, right? I visited there a few years ago with my oldest son. And just the whole route back and I wrote a paper on it, actually, grabbing back the roots. Where does our democracy come from? What kind of people helped create it, and how did that go? And he came here in 1906, 16 years old, and stuck around. And my dad became a congressman, a state senator, my brother a U.S. senator, my other brother a state senator. People are doing things in one generation when they show up and work hard, and that was the way it was. My grandfather came to Ellis Island, wow, what a place, and it was hard as hell, I can tell you. And he would have told you too. He told me. And sort of my great-grandmother who came here back in the late 1800s, but going back in time and discovering all of our roots, this moment, today, is this incredible opportunity to put the brakes on the raid on our digital doorway, which is what's happening. You know, all these idiots standing in front of the Congress being asked questions by other idiots trying to masquerade as democracy. You know, this is crazy, ladies and gentlemen. We're being hijacked. Our democracy, our republic, is being taken from us, in front of us, by people taking the public square as if they own it. Because that's what's also changed. So when you think about the digital doorway, think about the digital public square, and get this wrapped in the right direction. We own all of our data. And anyone who takes that data and uses it to manipulate us, to persuade us in any way, violate our very essence in terms of civil liberties, who we are. And they masquerade with all this social nonsense as if we're one big, squishy blob of humanity, and we're not. We're individual, sovereign souls created in the image and likeness of a creator, energetically and consciously, and through this thing that links us so profoundly. And we need to act like it, change the world, do it differently. That's what this century is about. That's what we are about as human beings. Nick Begich, we'll be right back. You're listening, but working with Alex, and you know, I think about him as the most misunderstood radio talk show host in America. How about that? Because you have to know someone over their block of their time, you know, on the planet to know a person, you know, and those who've listened to Alex a long time or been associated with him a long time, you know, the heart of the man, you know, and that's what matters. And I know all these really unusual characters. You know, I laugh about it a lot because they're really unusual from every angle you can imagine. From my friends, the Wheeler brothers, a couple of wild miners in Alaska that I've known for almost 40 years, you know, good friends of mine, and they're now in their 70s. You know, I think about Alex, I think about some of the heads of state I've met in my life and I've known, and a lot of people I've known. And what I do know is that the heart of each of us that connects us, that is the deal, you see. And a lot of the things we do are totally different. They seem really radically different, but they don't define us. They're just small expressions of us, if I can say that. But the heart of a person is what I've always connected. And so it makes for a lot of unusual friends. And I appreciate that. And here's what also I know, is I met everyone who's connected in this way has tremendous power. Most don't remember. I say this. A lot of my work today is about remembering, helping others remembering myself. More about what we are in the expression of what we see in the world around us. So we're not lost in what we see in the world around us. We get confused and we think that's us playing the game in the world around us through the body that our soul occupies in the world around us. Now think about it. In this moment, you get to decide stuff. That's called choice, free will. That's pretty powerful. Think about it. Really pretty powerful if you apply it fully with the dimension of knowing who and what you are. That's the essence of it. You know, and that's also the essence of the dark side of it. Because what you choose when you find that power within you is a lot of attached to that. And so that's why I always say ask for grace, ask for wisdom, and ask for knowledge. Make sure they're all wrapped together because it really works better that way. But I want to say this about what I was saying earlier about sovereignty and the individual and the currency between the wealth and the things that are of the earth, but what people who are of the earth in the world, lost in the world. For them, that's all there is. So the bigger the pile of chips, you know, somehow that's it. And then they want to take their, what they think is their consciousness, their brain and programming, and pump it into some kind of AI and preserve their essence, you know, because they don't get it. You don't need to do all that. It already is. But here's the fear that's running that programming. There's so much. I mean, think about this. I was saying it during the break in a little more colorful language with the guys working with me today, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm going, they are really scared. You really think about the deep state, because with a guy like Trump at the helm, he might break it up into 10,000 pieces of truth, but he better roll it out fast, because the public's going to have to digest this, and they're very quickly shutting down the ability to hear it by turning off everything, even the communication links from the President of the United States. Stop and fathom that for just a moment. Contemplate that for a moment. Mainstream media is thinking about turning him off. Don't let that happen, for goodness sake. Now is the time, and now is the hour, Mr. President, to pull the pin and release the files, open the files, let truth open the eyes of the nation again. Time to break the back of the deep state. Now is that time. Look at the last 50 years, we're being looted. We've been looted for the last 200. We were looted before. The whole point was to loot this hemisphere and hand it off to the Spanish and Portuguese royalty when the Pope split the New World, and then the British got involved and kind of carved out a chunk, and then we decided, hey, the heck with all of you. And then we started taking it away from them. Think about all of the things that unfolded as the Tsar let go of Alaska. Why do you do that? Because he figured, hey, I better sell it, because otherwise we're probably going to take it. And, it was think about the nature of history within its context to come to different conclusions, because it's really about wealth. Even in Alaska, the British Crown owned 25% of British petroleum all the way through the middle 80s, I believe. And they were pumping Alaskan oil, which was producing at that time 2 million barrels of oil a day. So it was still going to the British Crown indirectly through British Petroleum. It's like the handoff. Oh, we got caught by the Crown. Let's build a corporation. Let's bury it in that. Think about the way of layering, create some new words. I always call it a corporation. That sounds good. Let's do that. But the point of the matter is you create new entities. Now you don't have a sovereign crown. You don't want sovereign individuals. You're running around making all the decisions. You better create some sovereign corporations that can run around and not be liable for anything. Here's what they did. That's what they did. Created all of these things, and got us further and further and further removed from the things that really represent wealth. And then they squandered our money and handed it off to the bankers. That was part of 1932. And think of the banker game. That's a hell of a game. You take $100 in, and then you loan out 1,000 on credit cards. So you pay somebody $1 a year if you're lucky for your $100, and then they loan out 1,000 and they collect, $180. And here we are. And they do that with the nation and the national debt on steroids, more or less. So the whole thing is a looting, and then a way to enslave the future generations to paying back a borrowed debt from fictional money to take real assets and concentrate them in fewer and fewer hands. And then lately we saw them hand out like a couple $100,000 per family of 4, although families of 4 didn't see it, to corporate America once again. We saw it in other forms. The 20-year war. What 20-year war? The one in Afghanistan and Iraq we've been in, and all over the world we've been in, that's costed trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, like we just spent in the last few months, only we did it on the installment plan to indebted our future generations. For what? For people that don't even want us there. Why? Why are we there? What are our interests? Really, what are our interests in these places, in these entanglements that squander our national wealth? Trump recently is pulling troops out of Germany. Why is he doing it? Germans can pay for their own defense, for God's sake. Why do they have good schools and their people aren't enslaved to student debt in their universities? Because they don't have to pay for their military, because we have, and instead we have lousy medical care, and our next generation enslaved in student debt, worrying about their jobs, now they're going to pay it in this digital ball. Right? Why are the elites making Russia and China our enemy today? Because they're not playing ball. Wow. China China, I don't like China. Okay, I say that loudly. I don't like their political system. You know, they run capitalism as an economic system. I don't like the political system. Russia's an emerging democracy, still got a ways to go, but they're also a capitalistic system. But these two together are going independent on the currency game. You see, they're getting out of the dollar game. And so is Brazil, and perhaps India, and perhaps South Africa, and perhaps a whole lot of others. And when they do, all of a sudden there's going to be a pile of dollars floating around with no home to park in. And you're seeing this, and the same with euros and rubles in terms of gas and oil exchange. There's going to be a whole new configuration, ladies and gentlemen. U.S. bankers are in deep trouble, and so is the dollar in the long run, because that's the decoupling of contracts globally. Our sovereignty is linked to a theory of wealth that is false. It's a false narrative. Real wealth is converting money into those four things: labor, entrepreneurship, things that make things, from shovels to factories, things that make things, and land and natural resources, real wealth. Buildings, property, things that build the future, things that are inflation-proof. The dollar goes to heck, and people are paying higher rents. Everything is about wealth. Don't be lost in the shuffle of paper. Don't lose your sovereignty in the games that are being played. Listen and look at what is at band.video. Take a look. There's a lot of material there. This is Dr.
The reason why General Flynn has been targeted is the same reason why Roger Stone has been targeted, is the same reason why Alex Jones has been targeted, is the same reason why perhaps even many of you in this audience have been targeted. You've been identified by the deep state, whether it's at a high level like General Flynn or just a low level like somebody on Twitter. You've been identified as somebody who will never give up a fight, who will always stand for America, and won't back down. And so when they see General Flynn taking that stance, and then they see him working with the potential president and then president-to-be Donald Trump, these Democrats that engage in all these crimes, they're in panic mode. They know they engage in all the crimes, so they try to put the light on Flynn and then silence him and get him out of the fight, knowing he's like kryptonite.
One that could uncover all of that.
Well, I mean, I'm not right all the time, but like 99.9% of the time. And this was the opening night for the NHL. All the players on the ice. Traditionally, it's just the starters and the goaltenders, so 12 players on the ice. All players on the ice for the national anthem. Big grand flag ceremony. And the coaches and everybody in reverence. So, as I accurately predicted, the NHL would not bow to the leftist mobs and turn their sport into a liberal indoctrination tank, unlike every other sports league out there now, including the MLB, sadly. So, if you still want to watch some sports, the NHL hasn't been totally tainted yet. But I will tell you this, as I predicted that, the NHL has laid the patchwork to go liberal, folks. And I think in 2 years, they're announcing, well, they've already announced it, but the Seattle Kraken is going to be playing in, I think it's Renewable Energy Arena. And then once the Seattle Kraken gets in and then Seattle gets involved, then they may go liberal leftist. But for the time being, they haven't done it yet, so you can still enjoy NHL hockey. But if you want to watch an MLB game or an NBA game or an NFL game, guess what? You're going to get the leftist indoctrination. And I wanted to ask, because a lot of the players in the NHL are foreign-born, so you got 25%, at least with the last numbers here that I can see, 25% of the NHL is American. Probably about the same, maybe even in the MLB, so I don't even know if that's a legit excuse. Anyway, hey, some people still love America, and those that don't, well, they're showing their true colors. One person who loves America, put it all on the line for America, not once, not twice, but probably for the rest of his life, that's General Flynn. Now, Ivan Raiklin has been following this case with some, inside tracks to know what's going on. I don't know if you're still talking to Sidney Powell. She's, of course, banned from social media. How dare she for talking about hydroxychloroquine? But Ivan Raiklen, give us the latest. Flynn was beyond exonerated. He was innocent. He was actually the victim of a crime. Now they're coming back up with the deep state to try to charge him illegally again. Talk about what's happening.
Sure. Just a point of clarification. You know what? Let me take this off.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, we want you to breathe on air, all right? We know you love Mike Flynn.
So, Sidney Powell, we exchange every once in a while via text. I haven't really talked to her. She's very busy with the case. As far as, let me see here. Where do we start? I mean, there's so much going on. First thing is, she's back on social media, on Twitter. So she was banned, I believe, for about a day. She was muted. Now, she does have a separate account called Creeps on a Mission. So that will be her backup account if she is banned or muted or whatever on Twitter, which currently her account is Sidney Powell, the number 1. Okay, so what's the latest and greatest with the Flynn case? Yesterday, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, let me kind of explain how this works. You go from district court judge appeals to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and usually when there's an appeal to the circuit, it's done with the 3-judge panel. Now, the whole court, there's 11 justices, and there's some other sort of judges, but there's 11 main judges on the court. So what happened was Judge Sullivan is trying to, on his own, without any constitutional authority, prosecute General Flynn. Even though the Department of Justice has dismissed the case, Sidney Powell, representing General Flynn, agreed to dismiss the case based on all the new evidence that has come out, to include now, after that requested dismissal, last Thursday, the DNI, the new one, John Radcliffe, released documentation showing and essentially confirming through documentation that there was an FBI agent by the name of Joe Pientka that spied on Trump, Chris Christie, and General Flynn at the time in August of 2016. So the judge wants to cover the tracks of Biden and Obama by delaying the prosecution of Flynn, even though they know they're going to lose. They're going to eventually lose. They're just trying to buy time until November 3rd at approximately 9 or 10 p.m., depending on when the voting results come in, showing that whoever the next, if it's going to be a re-election, or Biden pulls it off somehow through cheating, lying, and stealing. So now, after the 2-1 opinion by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals saying that the district court is supposed to dismiss the case against Flynn, the judge, there you have it, Judge Sullivan, appeals to the entire court. So in a decision that wasn't it wasn't unanimous, but a majority of the court, the full court, decided that they were going to have a hearing. And then the other thing that they did was to what's called vacate the 3-judge panel ruling to dismiss the case, meaning that that's on pause until the hearing occurs. The hearing is going to be August 11th at, I don't know what time. It's going to be during the daytime, but it'll most likely be a virtual briefing similar to how they did it before the D.C. Circuit Court a couple of weeks ago. So you'll have oral arguments done by most likely Sidney Powell, also the Solicitor General or his designate that represents the Department of Justice or the U.S. attorneys, right? And then you'll have somebody representing Judge Sullivan, probably his previous attorney. And they're going to come to a conclusion on whether or not to dismiss this case. I just think that this is probably going to go, I hate to say this, I think this is going to go to the Supreme Court either way. And then we're going to have to wait and see on how that is going to be decided. Because on the Democratic side, they're trying to focus their efforts on delaying so that General Flynn is out of the fight. He can't tell his story publicly because he's focused on essentially fighting the knife fight in the courtroom. And then once he's free, he can speak, but potentially it may be too late after the election, depending on the results of the election.
And this is so incredible to see this happening to General Flynn, and people need to understand this. The reason why General Flynn has been targeted is the same reason why Roger Stone has been targeted, is the same reason why Alex Jones has been targeted, is the same reason why perhaps even many of you in this audience have been targeted. You've been identified by the deep state, whether it's at a high level like General Flynn or just a low level like somebody on Twitter, you've been identified as somebody who will never give up a fight, who will always stand for America, and won't back down. And so when they see General Flynn taking that stance, and then they see him working with the potential president and then president-to-be Donald Trump, these Democrats that engage in all these crimes, they're in panic mode. They know they engage in all the crimes, so they try to put the light on Flynn and then silence him and get him out of the fight, knowing he's like
First one
kryptonite.
that could uncover all of that, because he understood the system. Remember, I worked for him in 2014. I mean, this story goes way back. Maybe at some point I'll share the story where it goes back to 2014. Some people have mentioned it, but a lot of the disclosures that you're hearing and reading about recently in conservative press only take it back to August of 2016. This goes back to when Obama resigned General Flynn in 2014. It was April, essentially, when they had the spat where he told the truth, spoke truth to power about what was going to happen in Iraq, and Obama didn't want to hear it. So he was resigned. And then after that, I know we're running out of time. After that, he went to Trump Tower in New York to go ahead and jump on the Trump campaign. And I think at that point is when Obama and Biden started to really scrutinize all
because Flynn knew where the bodies were buried, and I'd have to check my timeline. But I believe that was when there was a certain cash payout to Iran that some people in the military didn't take too kindly of.
Christmas in July. Simply put, we take the huge specials that we usually only do in November and December for Christmas, and we have them in July. Well, July's about to end this Friday, so it's your last chance to take advantage of store-wide free shipping, double Patriot points, and 50 to 60% off all our best sellers. Now, I have to end this special by Sunday maximum. That's already 2 days into. Terror attacks against the American people. Killings, mass shootings, bombings, you name it. And they're on video saying they're going to do it. And so they just don't want there to be any local or federal response to this, so that once it really hits, and once they've gotten all their little minions empowered, believing they're not going to be challenged, and believing they're going to win, they can fully pull the trigger and do this. So we're 2 minutes to midnight. This is from my APD source directly from the APD. Just spoke to APD source Monday evening. BLM and other anti-police group members were riding around downtown Austin in technicals, pickup trucks with 2 four-armed individuals with rifles in the back, stopping cars. You already have video of this. Counterflowing, going the wrong way on streets, just exercising, like ISIS does, control. APD reported on what was happening and wanted to intervene, but were told to stand down unless they started shooting. These trucks were stopping in the middle of the road, intimidating other motorists, etc. Rank and file cops were furious. They weren't allowed to act. I mean, imagine just lawless vigilante communist